just a moment. Please go ahead and put your name, the agency that you are, and your preferred pronouns in the chat so we can see who is in the room.
Thank you for getting us started, everyone. We will keep admitting people from the waiting room.
So we'll give them a few more minutes to join the web conference. Welcome, everyone. Like David said, we are here with Valor's New Laws and Legislation web conference. We will be starting in just a few minutes, giving folks a few more minutes to join. Thank you for joining us. As you all wait, we'd like to hear from you and please let us know where you are joining us, what organization. Please write your name and your organization on the chat. Thank you.
Great to see everyone putting their names in. Thank you for doing that. We will be starting in about 2 minutes.
I see we have Peace Over Violence. We have Priya and Title IX advocates. Welcome. We have Lumina Alliance from San Luis Obispo. Welcome. Haven. Everyone, maybe another minute to start. Welcome, everyone. We have someone from Santa Cruz County. Detective with sex crimes. Welcome. See that we have a few folks from everywhere. Plumas, yes, all over. Okay, so I think we are good to start. Let everyone in. Welcome everyone to Valor's New Laws and Legislation web conference. We do thank you for joining us today. We are recording this conference, so we will have the presentation and the slides available for you after our web conference today. My name is Claudia Cibaja, and I work here at Valor. I'm one of the project managers, and I am very happy to be here with you today. We have Velena and Grace. Grace Glazer will be the one facilitating our web conference. You can introduce yourself, Grace.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claudia. And hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Glazer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Valor's Public Affairs and Policy Manager. I joined the Valor team back in September, and I'm very excited to be here and talk about some new laws and legislation with you all today. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Velena.
Yes, hi, thank you, everybody. I'm so glad that you're all here today with us. My name is Velena Kumis. I'm project assistant here at Valor, been here since 2005, and I'm joining you today to be here to assist you with any TA support that you might need. Please feel free to use the chat to drop in your questions. You'll find that on the Zoom dashboard, as well as the little feature for raising your hand if you need to speak. You can also access the closed captioning by the feature for the transcripts on the Zoom dashboard. So I'm going to hand this off to Grace.
Thank you, Velena. And if you have any quick questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We will also leave some time at the end of this presentation to dive into a few more questions. I know we have a lot of content to cover and a little bit of time. So with that, I will go ahead and dive into some of our legislative updates. So first, I want to start talking about Valor's policy framework. I think that this is really important in us setting the stage and to provide some background on why Valor supported certain initiatives last year. As you can see on our screen, Valor's tagline is advancing equity and ending sexual violence. This really provides us with the opportunity to expand our framework and focusing on the intersections of violence and how we can continue to advance equity to end sexual violence. You will see that there are a few pieces of legislation that focus on more so on advancing equity, both at the state and federal levels. So with that, let's dive into some of our federal policy updates. First, I would like to focus on S3623, also known as the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2022. The VAWA reauthorization reauthorized all current VAWA grant programs through 2027 and increased support for underserved survivor communities, including LGBTQ+ communities, culturally specific programs, and services in rural communities. It also improved prevention and response to sexual violence, as evidenced through the Rape Prevention and Education Program and Sexual Assault Services Program. Valor is a member of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, which allowed us the space to support the reauthorization of VAWA and also allowed our staff, as you can see on the screen, to attend the signing of the reauthorization of VAWA, which happened at the White House in March of 2022. So you'll see President Biden there with our CEO, Sandra Enriquez, our Deputy Director, David Lee, and our former policy manager, John Finley. And the VAWA Reauthorization Act went into effect October 1st of 2022. The next piece of legislation I want to point out is S4524, or known as the Speak Out Act. This act bans pre-dispute NDAs in cases of sexual assault and harassment, and this law will prevent NDAs placed against survivors in the workplace before any type of violence is reported, and will allow decreased barriers and increased opportunities for survivors to disclose violence if they choose. Reliance, which is one of Valor's national partnerships, along with Valor, supported this policy initiative, and it became effective upon signature on December 7th of 2022. HR 4445, also known as Ending Forced Arbitration Act of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment, amends the Federal Arbitration Act, which gives survivors of sexual assault and sexual harassment claims under federal, state, or tribal law the option to bring those claims in court, regardless if there is an arbitration agreement signed. This also gives survivors increased options after experiencing sexual violence, and Reliance, Valor's national partnership, supported this initiative, and our CEO also had the opportunity to attend the signing in person at the White House. This was signed in March of 2022 and went into effect immediately. However, this only applies to claims filed on or after March 3rd of 2022. HR 8404, also known as the Respect for Marriage Act, protects same-sex and interracial marriages by repealing the Defense of Marriage Act, which will ensure that all federal benefits are available to married couples no matter where they live in the United States, and that states give full faith and credit to all valid marriages. This is a huge win across our country and was a catalyst after the overturning of Roe. This was something that Valor supported, and it became effective immediately upon signature on December 13th of 2022. And the last piece of federal legislation that I would like to highlight is HR 2471, also known as the Consolidated Appropriations Act. This is also largely referred to as the omnibus bill that was passed in December of 2022. And this increased funding for key sexual violence prevention programs. And I'll give a brief breakdown of that. So a few that I want to specifically highlight. The Sexual Assault Services Program increased from $24.5 million to $78.5 million. Rape prevention and education program increased from 5 million to 61.75 million. VAWA culturally specific programs increased from 1 million to 11 million. And the VOCA cap was set at 1.9 billion, which is a slight decrease from last year. However, there is no VAWA transfer in the amount allocated in the 2022 bill. So that wraps up our federal policy updates, and now we'll move into more state-specific content. The first one I want to point out is the 2022 state budget request. So Valor partnered with the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and the Culturally Responsive Domestic Violence Network, requesting 15 million in ongoing prevention funding and 25.5 million to support culturally specific responses, innovations, and holistic approaches to ending sexual and domestic violence and all types of violence in California. Our champion for this was Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, and unfortunately, the legislature and governor did fail to fund this budget request, but we do want to thank those of you who signed on to and supported the ask for 15 million in ongoing prevention funding, as we know this is really critical for our state. Prop 1, 2022 was an election year for us, and Valor supported the passage of Prop 1, also known as the Constitutional Right to Reproductive Freedom. This proposition will amend California's state constitution to guarantee access to abortion and contraception and remove any government involvement. Essentially, this proposition will keep reproductive care decisions between an individual and their doctor. This is a huge move for California, especially knowing that Roe was overturned last year. So Valor is excited to have supported this. All right, we will dive now into California Assembly bills that were signed in 2022. The first is AB 547, authored by Assemblymember McCarty. This expands the survivor notification rights for domestic violence protective orders, and will protect domestic violence survivors by notifying them of their perpetrator's address when they're released on probation. The reason I'm pointing this bill out is because the definition of abuse that is used in this bill is pulled from Family Code Section 6203, where sexual assault falls under this definition. So survivors will only be notified if they request this information. And this bill was co-sponsored by our sister coalition, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. And this will go into effect January 1st of 2024. AB 1712, authored by Assemblymember Medina, is the Campus Safety Online Survey Tool. This bill will require California community colleges, CSUs, and UC schools administration to consult with students, both undergraduate and graduate level, and professionals to develop trauma-informed questions about campus safety. They will specifically be consulting about how to ask questions about rates of sexual assault and domestic violence on campuses and making sure that we're really including voices at all levels. This bill went into effect January 1st of this year. AB 1726, authored by Assemblymember Aguilar Curry, is also known as the Address Confidentiality Program. It makes amendments to the current Safe at Home program, which creates a confidential mailing address for survivors and extends response time to return mail to under the confidential address. This will also provide further protections for survivors and seek out and engage, so that way they can safely seek out and engage in services in California. It also limits the circumstances under which a participant could be terminated from the program, and also helps further protect a participant's location. This bill was co-sponsored by the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence and will go into effect January 1st of 2024. AB 2683, authored by Assemblymember Gabriel, requires training on preventing and responding to sexual violence and harassment at post-secondary institutions, including colleges, universities, and community colleges, both private and public institutions that receive Title IX funding. This is a great bill because it'll help standardize a training model across all universities and will create a baseline so that way students, administration, and faculty are receiving the same information. This law will also increase education about sexual violence and harassment and will help connect survivors to services on and off their campuses. This bill will go into effect on January 1st of 2024, and Valor is proud to support it. And we are also continuing conversations with Assemblymember Gabriel's office on implementation. AB 2777, authored by Assemblymember Wicks, is also known as the Sexual Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act. It provides survivors of sexual assault either a 10-year timeline to file a claim for financial compensation or a 3-year window from the date the survivor discovers injury or an illness on or after January 1st of 2009, whichever occurs later. This also applies to minors after their 18th birthday and expands the ability for adults to bring sexual assault lawsuits forward, and really just creates capacity for survivors to seek justice on their own terms and their own timeline. Valor supported this bill and it went into effect on January 1st of this year. That rounded out our assembly bills that we wanted to cover, and now we will touch on some of the Senate bills that were signed in 2022. And we will start with SB 357, authored by Senator Wiener, also known as the Safer Streets for All Act. This bill repeals existing California law that criminalized loitering with the intent to commit prostitution, which was historically used as a way to target and discriminate against communities of color. The law will make it easier for folks to access safe housing and employment and clear their records. This bill was sponsored by the ACLU of Southern California, and Valor supported it. This bill went into effect on January 1st of this year. SB 914, authored by Senator Susan Rubio, is the Homeless Equity Left Behind Act, also known as the HELP Act. And it provides additional protections for survivors of domestic violence and unaccompanied women within vulnerable populations to connect them to housing services. In California, 18% of unhoused individuals report experiencing domestic violence, and they wait an average of 10 years to acquire stable housing. This bill will help expedite that timeline and will help increase needed services for survivors. This bill was co-sponsored by the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, and it will be effective January 1st of 2024. SB 916, authored by Senator Leyva, gives survivors access to more information about the status of their forensic exam kit by giving them access to the Department of Justice Safety Database portal. Valor did not take a position on this bill, and this went into effect January 1st of this year. SB 935, authored by Senator Min, amends the previous protective order timeline. So with this new bill, folks will be allowed to renew their domestic violence protective order for for 5 years or more. Previously, you could only renew a protective order up to 5 years. So now that timeline has been extended. This was a bill that was supported by the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence and went into effect on January 1st of this year. SB 975, also authored by Senator Min, is better known as a path to relief from coerced debt for survivors of domestic violence, elder abuse, and foster youth. This bill really helps break cycles of financial violence and financial abuse. It provides survivors with the opportunity to seek relief from repaying debt that they were coerced into taking on, and also provides survivors the opportunity to settle matters outside of court if both parties consent to that. The California Partnership to End Domestic Violence co-sponsored this bill, and this bill went into effect on January 1st of this year. SB 1017, authored by Senator Eggman, strengthens rental housing protections for survivors from wrongful termination or failing to renew a lease as a result of violence. Previously, if this was brought to court, the scope of allowable personnel to provide documentation as to why someone was terminated from a lease or was failed the opportunity to renew their lease was very limited. This bill also allows the opportunity for an advocate to provide documentation. As we know, a lot of survivors like to be connected to our local rape crisis centers. The California Partnership to End Domestic Violence co-sponsored this bill, and it went into effect on January 1st of 2023. SB 1228, authored by Senator Wiener, is a bill that originated out of a case in San Francisco. As you can see, we have a clipping of a news article on the screen up there. But essentially, what happened was there was a case in San Francisco where law enforcement linked a woman to a crime using DNA from her forensic evidence kit. So this bill establishes protections for DNA evidence that is collected from a survivor of sexual violence during a forensic exam to not be used against the survivor for a different criminal charge. Valor supported this, and we even had our board president, Tina Rodriguez, speak at a rally in support of SB 1228, where she said, quote, "We will continue to advocate to raise our voices for survivors. To the survivors who are out there listening to this message, Valor will stand with you. We will elevate your voices and we will discourage this type of exploitation." Passage of this bill is a huge win for Valor and went into effect on January 1st of this year. And that wraps up the Senate bills that have passed. Now we will get, I'm just going to say, I'm apologizing if you can hear the lawn work that's happening outside of my window. And so now we will get into the vetoed or postponed bills that did not make it through the California legislative session in 2022. AB 2103, authored by Assemblymember Bauer Cahan, would have created the crisis response for victims and survivors of violence pilot program, which would have been a statewide program connecting survivors and loved ones to resources and services. This was held in Assembly appropriations, and Valor did not take a position on this bill. AB 2320, authored by Assemblymember Wicks, also known as the Reproductive Health Clinic Initiative for Innovative Care, or better known as Reproductive Health Clinic, would have created the Reproductive Clinic Pilot Program, which would have provided direct funds to primary care clinics to provide reproductive services in 5 counties across California to address reproductive health inequities faced by communities of color. This bill was vetoed by the governor on September 22nd of 2022, and Valor did support the passage of this bill. AB 2553 was authored by Assemblymember Grayson. It was also known as the California Multidisciplinary Alliance to Stop Trafficking Act, also known as California MAST. It was the budget ask put forward by the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, also known as CAST. And this bill would have created capacity for program evaluation and outreach for survivors and victims of human trafficking, and provide recommendations to the state of California to strengthen our response to supporting survivors. This bill was held in Senate Appropriations with no further action, and Valor did support this. AB 2790, which was authored by Assemblymember Wicks, also known as the Centering Survivor Safety and Health Bill. Currently, law dictates that healthcare providers must report known or suspected domestic violence or sexual violence to law enforcement. This bill would have removed that mandatory report and would have required healthcare providers to refer survivors to community-based or national advocacy services. This bill was held in Senate Appropriations, and Valor supported this. SB 299, authored by Senator Leyva, also known as the Equal Access for Victims Act, would have removed barriers faced by victims of police violence and other violent crimes when accessing assistance from the California Victims Compensation Program. And it also would have allowed advocates to provide documentation to access these funds. This bill was held in Assembly Appropriations and was a bill that Valor supported. With that, I would like to use some time to talk about what Valor's 2023 policy priorities are. I'm really excited to share some of these initiatives. Though we're just in the initial stages of this year, I'm sure it'll continue to develop, and we would love to keep you all in the loop. But we can start with some of the things that we already have in the works. So the first one, I know I'd mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that we had a 2022 budget ask. We also have a 2023 budget ask. So we are partnering with the same three organizations as last year, the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, the Culturally Responsive Domestic Violence Network, and the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, where we will be increasing our ask to $50 million and focusing it on ongoing and stable funding to prevent and end sexual and domestic violence. We know that in times of economic uncertainty, violence increases, and as California turns towards a year of budget deficit, it's really imperative for us to continue to advocate for prevention funding. When the governor released his preliminary budget on January 10th, our ask was not included, but we will continue to advocate for funding in hopes that it will be included in May. As of right now, we have over 80 organizations supporting this budget request, and we look forward to continuing to advocate for it. Additionally, we will be focusing on centering survivor health and safety. We know that at times survivors can be fearful of accessing needed healthcare out of fear of engaging with law enforcement, medical coercion, or other reasons. So Valor is invested in increasing access for survivors. We have a goal of connecting survivors to community-based and national organizations and services, and a desire to remove barriers to accessing services across California. Survivors deserve choice and autonomy in how and when they interact with different services, and we are just looking forward to carrying this theme throughout our policy initiatives this year. And lastly, we will also be focusing on reproductive freedom. So starting last year when the Dobbs decision was leaked, Valor began stepping into a larger role of addressing the intersections of reproductive justice and an end to sexual violence. We released a statement when Roe was overturned and hosted national dialogues to better understand the needs of communities in responding to the loss of Roe. From there, we created toolkits and initiated grassroots campaign bridging the anti-violence movement with the reproductive justice movement, and have really enjoyed this work and recognized the necessity of it. So we'll be continuing that work into this year. We will be working on establishing a federal baseline protection for access to abortion and contraception, because we know that survivor justice is reproductive justice. This is an equity issue, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we are really focusing on equity issues, and we can't be forcing we can't be having forced births, taking away access to needed healthcare, or causing other forms of harm. So we'll be working in collaboration with other movements and organizations to achieve reproductive freedom. And wow, I sped through that. That wraps up Valor's initial policy priorities for 2023. So at this time, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. We'd be happy to engage in dialogue. And if you don't have any questions right now, I will say my inbox is open. Please feel free to send me an email. We will be making this recording and the slides available for you all afterwards. Oh, it looks like we have a question in the chat. How can those of us from smaller agencies get involved in moving positive policy forward? That is a great question. So there are a few opportunities for you to get involved. One, Valor does release regular policy updates through our newsletter. If you're a member, we provide it through that way. We post up on our social media, and that includes opportunities for you to sign on to our policy initiatives, as well as any opportunities for you to meet with your elected representatives. So there's a whole slew of ways to get involved, and we will continue to update you all. We will use the people who have attended this meeting today. We will be happy to include you in any future policy updates. That's a great question. It looks like Jen from Baywar said, I have a question about SB 914. Just what does improving connections to housing mean practically? Jen, that is a great question. I would defer to the partnership on answering this as they helped create the language for this. But I think it's surrounding removing any, or like helping build survivors credit, because a lot of times credit can get in the way of accessing affordable housing, help build up a reliable rental history. And I will connect with the partnership and see if there's anything else that I'm missing, but off the top of my head, that's what I remember. They were saying those were the two primary areas. Yeah, you're welcome. Diane said, I'm working on a California bill for next year. I would love to have stress-related medical dental problems to be covered under all medical insurances. Many DV medicals are not covered at all. If anyone is interested, please connect with Diane. Great, thank you for sharing that. And Jen, yes, that is a great comment. With eviction moratorium ending, housing is on your brain today. I understand that. And Claudia, if you can go to there's one more slide after this. I just want to make sure that folks see Valor's social media handles, because I did talk about getting involved with us. So here you can find and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We also have LinkedIn, and do want to make sure that you all are staying up to date. We send out weekly emails, and we'll just continue to push out really great policy that's focused on advancing equity and ending sexual violence. With that, I think that I might give you all a lot of time back in your day, and really appreciate everyone taking the time to come here and learn about everything that Valor is working on last year and moving into this year. And please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you to Claudia and Velena for helping today, and everyone else for attending. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, and if Grace and Claudia and Velena stay on the meeting as people are leaving, and then we will put the remaining people into a waiting room. So thanks, everyone.